The following segment is brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action by signing up at future42.org. A huge win over the weekend for members of Seattle's Chinatown-International district community. This is a story that we've been detailing now for weeks. Members of the CID community had been pushing back against a planned expansion of a homelessness complex. Would have allowed for 500 shelter beds, and it was scheduled to be expanded near their neighborhood. And they were like, listen, we've had so many crime issues. You haven't consulted us about this. We haven't given you input about this. We're worried about the impacts of it. And you even had some residents of the Chinatown-International district community who said, you know, you've got these progressive politicians who love to come down here and use us for photo ops. But when we come to them with real concerns about something, they just dismiss it. They're not coming to the table to talk to us. So anyway, one of the reasons we've talked about it so much is Jonathan Cho, an independent journalist for Discovery Institute, has really been kept from getting answers from King County Executive Dow Constantine's office on it. We've played a couple clips where Dow Constantine fled from a press conference down a private elevator to avoid questions on it from Jonathan Cho. Then Jonathan Cho, a couple weeks later, was blocked from entering a press tour of the site of this homelessness shelter. So anyway, Dow Constantine comes out on Friday, and his office said that they're deciding to scrap plans for this shelter expansion, which of course people in the CID were thrilled about. Executive Constantine saying, I announced today that King County will maintain the current lease for the Salvation Army operated shelter in Soto while redirecting resources that were going to expand services at the site to invest in other projects. And he went on to talk about concerns the community had. He said, it is clear that building trust and resolving underlying concerns about the conditions in the community today will take considerable time before we can move forward with any added service capacity. Which is really interesting to me that you now have Dow Constantine acknowledging that there are some trust issues. Community members want, to have more of a say. Because if you recall the first sort of crazy interaction between Dow Constantine and Jonathan Cho was trying to ask Dow Constantine about this very issue, about the fact that CID residents felt like he had not considered or asked for their input before pushing ahead with this. So Dow Constantine flees this press conference, and then in the most sanctimonious fashion, when Jonathan Cho follows him into the hallway, he acts like, well, of course, I'm in the CID all the time listening to their concerns. It's just absurd to suggest that we haven't considered their input or we don't care about their input.
I'm in the Chinatown community continuously, but...
So why not put a moratorium on this before public input?
You're not actually a journalist.
So anyway, after insulting Jonathan Cho and refusing to answer his questions, now Dow's giving in for this very reason, saying, the Chinatown ID community doesn't feel like we've valued their input and we need to fix those relationships. So I just think it's, all the vilification of Jonathan Cho, and now Dow's like, okay, we're going to put a pause on this, which I don't think would have happened, by the way, had Jonathan Cho not, he was the only journalist in town shining a light on what was going on down there. And for that reason, another aspect of this infuriated me, and I think it should anger anyone who expects elected leaders of any political party to act with an ounce of self-awareness, to be reflective about their own shortcomings, which apparently is just too much to ask these days. So Seattle City Council member Tammy Morales, she is the councilwoman who her district includes the Chinatown-International district neighborhood. And if you recall, when there were protests happening in that neighborhood over this planned expansion, some of the elders in Chinatown were holding signs with Councilwoman Morales' face on it crossed out. What better sign or signal could you get that your constituents are not happy with you, right? So Councilwoman Tammy Morales puts out a statement about Dow Constantine scrapping plans for this enhanced shelter project. And the gist of her statement was, look, I think we really need this shelter, so I'm a little disappointed that it's not moving forward. But she acknowledges that her community had real concerns about not being consulted. And then she goes on to say, for the love of God, for the love of all things gaslighting, I just could not believe this line in her statement. So she talks about the lack of transparency that was a frustration for folks in the community. And then she went on to say this. This lack of transparency allowed for bad faith political actors without ties to the CID, such as a conservative think tank, to co-opt the narrative and cloud organic neighborhood resistance. So she's clearly talking about Jonathan Cho. So let me get this straight, Councilwoman. You're blaming Jonathan Cho, who, by the way, is an Asian American journalist, for daring to detail the concerns of Seattle's Asian American community. You're for some reason vilifying Jonathan Cho for daring to listen to community members that you had ignored. And that's somehow co-opting the narrative and clouding organic neighborhood resistance. You wouldn't even have known about that neighborhood resistance had Jonathan Cho not done stories about it, Councilwoman. And you would be wise to remember whose face they had plastered on signs with a big red line across it. And as you seek re-election in 2023, you would be wise to be a little bit introspective about your own failings as an elected leader. The previous segment was brought to you in partnership with Future 42. Turn your frustration into action at future42.org.